The Zephyrian Empire had perfected the art of being insufferably superior for approximately 3,000 standard cycles, which was quite impressive considering most species barely managed a few centuries before someone put them in their place. Their crystalline spires stretched across 17 star systems, their technology could reshape matter at the molecular level, and their battle fleets had never encountered a force they couldn't reduce to constituent atoms within the first volley. Naturally, this led them to the conclusion that they were the universe's gift to civilization itself. What truly set the Zephyrians apart from other galactic bullies, however, was their exquisite taste in entertainment. While lesser empires might content themselves with simple conquest or efficient genocide, the Zephyrians had elevated cruelty to an art form. Their crown jewel was the Grand Colosseum of Nexus Prime, a magnificent structure that could house 2 million spectators and featured the most advanced holographic projection systems in known space. Here, the Empire's elite gathered to witness what they called educational demonstrations, though the rest of the galaxy had less charitable terms for watching sentient beings fight to the death. The newest addition to their repertoire was something they dubbed chain fights, a delightfully twisted concept that involved forcing captives to battle while still wearing their restraint system. The Zephyrian psychological warfare specialists had determined that nothing quite broke a species' spirit like forcing them to fight for survival while literally chained. It was, they proclaimed with the sort of academic smugness that made other species want to punch them, the perfect metaphor for the natural order of the universe. Today's entertainment promised to be particularly amusing. The Empire had recently acquired specimens from a newly discovered species calling itself human, bipedal mammals from a backwater world that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. The intelligence reports were deliciously predictable: short lifespans, fragile physiology, tendency toward emotional decision-making, and an almost comical reliance on primitive chemical projectile weapons. Perfect gladiator material, really, entertaining enough to provide a decent show, weak enough that the audience wouldn't get bored waiting for the inevitable conclusion. The preparation chambers beneath the arena hummed with the efficient brutality that the Empire had perfected over millennia. Automated systems cataloged and processed the latest batch of entertainment assets with the same clinical precision used for inventory management. The human specimen had been particularly cooperative during processing. No screaming, no begging, no dramatic declarations of defiance that some species seemed to think were mandatory. Just a quiet observation of the proceedings that the technicians found refreshingly professional. Head Arena Master Vexthul observed the preparations through the quantum glass viewing portal, his forearms crossed in satisfaction. The human was smaller than expected, barely reaching the average Zephyrian's torso height, and showed none of the obvious predatory adaptations that made for exciting combat. No natural weapons, no armored hide, no obvious threat display. Even better, the psychological profile suggested this particular specimen was from their species' scientific caste, meaning it likely had never engaged in serious combat before capture. Double the restraint chains, Vexthul commanded, his translator converting his native harmonic frequencies into standard galactic. We want this to last at least 10 minutes before the Nexian warbeasts finish it. The betting pools are getting impatient. The technicians complied with practiced efficiency, layering additional quantum-locked shackles around the human's wrists, ankles, and torso. These weren't just decorative. Each link was forged from materials that could withstand planetary bombardment, and contained enough explosive charge to vaporize a small building if tampered with. The Empire had learned, through some embarrassingly expensive mistakes, that desperate creatures sometimes developed surprising levels of ingenuity when facing death. The human watched this process with what the technicians interpreted as resigned acceptance. They couldn't see the careful calculation behind those brown eyes, the way she cataloged each restraint system's attachment points, stress indicators, and mechanical tolerance. They certainly couldn't perceive the subtle shift in her breathing that indicated a predator assessing prey, rather than prey accepting fate. The crowd above roared with anticipation as the arena's holographic displays showed today's betting odds. The human's survival was rated at approximately 47,000 to 1, generous odds that reflected the Empire's commitment to giving their citizens at least theoretical hope of an upside. Several prominent nobles had placed substantial wagers on exactly how long the entertainment would last, with the popular consensus settling around 12 minutes for complete termination. The transport platform rose smoothly through the arena floor, carrying its chained cargo toward the killing ground above. Atmospheric processors adjusted the environment to provide optimal viewing conditions, while ensuring the human could survive long enough to provide adequate sport. The crowd's excitement reached fever pitch, as targeting displays locked onto the emerging figure. Vexthul activated the arena's communication system, his voice amplifying across the Colosseum with theatrical grandeur. Citizens of the Empire, today we present a demonstration of natural order. The inevitable triumph of evolution's champions over, he paused dramatically, pretender species who dare reach beyond their proper place. The massive doors began their slow, inexorable opening, revealing the killing ground that had claimed thousands of lives in service of Zephyrian entertainment. Somewhere in the depths of the arena, war beasts that had never known defeat stirred in anticipation of fresh prey. The humans stepped forward into the light, chains singing a metallic harmony with each movement. The arena doors sealed behind her with the finality of a tomb, and 2 million voices rose in bloodthirsty approval. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The arena floor stretched before her like a carefully manicured killing field, complete with tasteful obstacles and convenient weapon caches that the Empire had thoughtfully provided to extend the entertainment value. Overhead, the holographic displays cheerfully counted down the seconds until the first wave of predators would be released, while bookmakers adjusted odds in real time based on spectator analysis of her posture and movement pattern. What the spectators couldn't see, and what their sophisticated scanning systems had somehow missed, was the way she tested each chain's range of motion with microscopic precision. Every step provided data, stress points, pivot angles, the precise moment when quantum-locked links reached their maximum extension. The Zephyrians had spent considerable effort making these restraints inescapable, but they'd operated under the fundamental assumption that their captive would want to escape them. They were about to learn why assumptions were dangerous things. The first release gate opened with a theatrical flourish that would have made ancient Roman emperors weep with envy. What emerged was a Nexarian stalker, 12 feet of muscle, chaton, and barely contained violence that had been genetically optimized for exactly this sort of entertainment. Its 6 legs moved with fluid grace, compound eyes tracking every movement while razor-sharp mandibles clicked in anticipation. The arena's information systems helpfully displayed its combat statistics: 47 victories, 0 defeats, average kill time of 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The crowd's enthusiasm reached new heights as the stalker began its approach, moving with the confident swagger of a creature that had never encountered genuine resistance. Somewhere in the VIP boxes, Vexthul leaned forward with the satisfaction of a master chef watching guests take their first bite of a perfectly prepared meal. The human stood perfectly still, chains hanging loose around her frame, appearing for all the galaxy like prey frozen in terror. The stalker's approach slowed to a predatory crawl, savoring what it perceived as an easy kill. Its mandibles spread wide, revealing rows of teeth that could shear through battleship armor. Then the chain connecting her wrists snapped taut as she spun, converting 18 inches of quantum-forged links into a whip that caught the stalker across its primary visual cluster with the sound of breaking glass. The creature's confident advance became a stumbling retreat as he sprayed from ruined compound eyes, its triumphant hiss transforming into something considerably less dignified. The crowd's cheering faltered. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. But the human was just getting started. As the blinded stalker thrashed in confusion, she wrapped the ankle chains around its rear legs with movements that suggested this wasn't her first time turning restraints into weapons. The creature's own momentum became its enemy as it toppled forward, presenting the vulnerable joint where its head connected to its thorax. The chest chain, pulled taut between both hands, proved remarkably effective at finding that particular weak point. The silence that followed the stalker's final convulsion was perhaps the most expensive quiet in galactic history, considering how much the spectators had paid for their seats. Vexthul found himself experiencing the uncomfortable sensation of watching a carefully orchestrated entertainment become something entirely different, something that resembled actual combat rather than ritualized slaughter. The human straightened, chains now glistening with alien blood, and looked directly up at the head arena master's viewing box. Even across the vast distance, her smile was clearly visible. It wasn't the smile of someone grateful for unexpected victory. It was the smile of someone who had just realized the game was much more interesting than anticipated. "Release the Korthak pack," Vexthul commanded, his voice betraying only the slightest tremor. All six of the crowd stirred with renewed interest. Korthak hunting packs were the arena's ultimate spectacle. Each beast stood 8 feet tall, possessed natural stealth capabilities that rendered them nearly invisible, and hunted with pack intelligence that had been enhanced through selective breeding. 6 of them working together had never failed to provide a satisfactory conclusion to any entertainment. The release was synchronized perfectly, 6 predators materializing from concealment around the arena's perimeter like shadows given deadly form. Their natural camouflage made them appear as heat distortions in the air, barely visible even to the arena's advanced sensor systems. The human would be dead before she even realized she was under attack, except she was already moving before the first Korthak completed its materialization sequence. The chains sang through the air as she spun them in patterns that seemed to defy physics, creating a defensive perimeter that turned her restraints into a 3-dimensional web of death. The first Korthak to reach her discovered that quantum-forged links could indeed penetrate stealth-enhanced hide when applied with sufficient kinetic energy and questionable sanity. The pack's coordinated assault became a chaotic melee as they found themselves fighting not just their intended prey, but the arena itself. She used every obstacle, every weapon cache, every architectural feature as part of an impromptu battlefield that transformed their hunting ground into her killing field. The chains became extensions of her will, sometimes whips, sometimes bolas, sometimes garrotes, that found throats with uncanny precision. By the time the last Korthak fell, the betting systems had crashed from trying to calculate odds for scenarios that their programmers had never imagined possible. The crowd sat in stunned silence, watching a chained human stand triumphant among the corpses of creatures that had never known defeat. Vexthul's hands trembled as he reached for the emergency controls. This had stopped being entertainment, and become something that threatened the very foundations of Zephyrian superiority. Time to end the demonstration before it became a revolution. Release everything, he whispered into his communicator. Every predator, every warbeast, every abomination in our collection. Simultaneously, the human wiped alien blood from her face, and looked up at the viewing boxes again. This time her smile was positively radiant. Finally, she said, though the arena's acoustics ensured her words reached every corner of the Colosseum. Now we're getting somewhere interesting. The release gates began opening in sequence, each one revealing horrors that had been collected from across the galaxy's darkest corner. The crowd held its collective breath, as death incarnate poured into the arena from a dozen different directions. The human began loosening her chains with deliberate care, like a musician tuning an instrument before a particularly challenging performance. What followed could generously be called a massacre, though that term implied a certain lack of artistry that did disservice to the performance unfolding below. The human had transformed the arena into her personal workshop, and the Empire's collection of apex predators had become her raw materials for crafting a lesson in applied xenobiology that no university in the galaxy could have provided. The draconian fireworm, a creature whose breath could melt starship hulls, discovered that its impressive thermal output became significantly less threatening when redirected through carefully positioned arena mirrors. The human had somehow calculated the precise angles needed to turn the beast's own flames against the pack of void stalkers approaching from its blind spot, creating a chain reaction of incineration that would have been mathematically beautiful if it weren't so thoroughly horrifying. Vexthul watched through his magnified viewing screens as she moved between threats with a fluidity that suggested this wasn't combat, but choreography. Each chain strike wasn't just an attack, it was a solution to multiple problems simultaneously. The same motion that opened the crystalline ravager's throat also triggered a weapons cache that provided her with exactly the tool needed to deal with the quantum leech materializing behind her. Impossible, muttered Chief Xenobiologist Krendar, from his observation post. Her species' reaction time shouldn't allow for that level of tactical process. Our models clearly indicate. His complaint was interrupted by the human casually backhanding a phasic reaper, a creature that existed partially outside normal space-time, with a chain that somehow managed to catch it mid-phase shift. The impossible physics of the impact sent ripples through the arena's quantum stabilizers, and caused several monitoring systems to simply give up and display error messages.
The crowd's mood had shifted from bloodthirsty anticipation to something approaching religious awe. They were witnessing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about the natural order, and the Zephyrian psyche was not well equipped to handle paradigm shifts during what was supposed to be casual entertainment. More disturbing still was the human's demeanor throughout the carnage. She wasn't fighting for survival, she was experimenting. Each new predator represented a fresh puzzle to solve, a novel application of physics to explore. When the Nightmare Collective, a hive-mind entity that existed as living shadow, attempted to engulf, she used the chain's quantum resonance to create a feedback loop that caused the creature to quite literally lose its mind, fragmenting into confused wisps that spent several minutes attacking each other. She's enjoying this, Bexthul realized with dawning horror. This isn't desperation or survival instinct, she's having fun. The observation was confirmed when the human paused mid-combat to wave cheerfully at the crowd, using the momentary distraction to wrap her chains around the neck of a charging berserker behemoth, and redirect its momentum into a conveniently placed lava pit. The casual nature of the maneuver, accomplished while acknowledging her audience, suggested a level of combat awareness that shouldn't have been possible for any species. The Empire had cataloged the arena's automated systems, designed to provide continuous waves of increasingly dangerous opponents, found themselves struggling to keep pace with the elimination rate. Creatures that had taken decades to capture and train were being dispatched in minutes, by methods that the arena's artificial intelligence couldn't even classify properly. The quantum computers responsible for managing the spectacle began generating error reports that essentially amounted to electronic expressions of confusion. By this point, the chains had become less restraint than accessory. The human moved with such fluid grace that the quantum-locked links seemed to dance around her, following trajectories that turned them into extensions of her will rather than impediments to her freedom. She had transcended the Empire's carefully designed limitations and transformed them into advantages that her captors couldn't have imagined. The betting systems had long since given up trying to calculate odds, displaying only a series of question marks where probability calculations should have been. The spectators found themselves in the unprecedented position of rooting for the entertainment, rather than placing wagers on its destruction, a cultural shift that would have far-reaching implications for Zephyrian society if anyone survived to analyze. "Deploy the Guardian," Bexthul commanded, his voice barely audible over the arena's alarms. "Everything else has failed." The Guardian was the Empire's ultimate fail-safe, a biomechanical construct that stood 30 feet tall, and incorporated the most dangerous characteristics of every species they had ever conquered. It had been designed specifically to handle situations where their standard entertainments proved insufficient, though it had never actually been deployed for that purpose. The creature's activation required authorization from the Imperial Council itself, which was automatically granted when arena casualties exceeded acceptable parameters. The floor of the arena split open to reveal a rising platform that dwarfed everything that had come before. The Guardian's emergence was accompanied by a sound that registered simultaneously, as mechanical grinding and organic roaring, a harmony of artificial and biological systems working in terrifying unison. Its multiple weapon systems came online with targeting displays that could track individual molecules, while its armor plating could withstand direct hits from battleship-grade weaponry. The human looked up at this monument to imperial engineering and tactical superiority, took a moment to assess its various threat systems and defensive capabilities, then began systematically loosening her chains with the careful attention of someone preparing for a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. "Oh good," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent arena. "I was starting to think you'd run out of interesting problems." The Guardian's sensor arrays focused on her with predatory intensity, weapons systems cycling through targeting protocols that could identify and eliminate threats across 17 different spectrums of existence. Its artificial intelligence processed threat assessments that rated her danger level as statistically negligible. A small organic creature with primitive restraint devices posed no meaningful challenge to a construct designed to single-handedly suppress planetary rebellion. The human finished adjusting her chains and smiled up at the mechanical monster with the genuine warmth of someone greeting an old friend. The Guardian's threat assessment algorithms immediately flagged this response as anomalous, and began running diagnostics to determine why their probability matrices were generating error conditions. Somewhere in the VIP boxes, imperial nobles who had never experienced fear in their millennia-long lives began to understand why other species had such interesting vocabularies for describing existential terror. The entertainment had become something else entirely, something that made the natural order of the universe seem considerably less certain than it had been an hour ago. The Guardians stepped forward with movements that shook the arena floor, weapons charging with energy discharges that painted the air in colors that didn't have name. Its targeting systems locked onto the small figure below with the precision of a god preparing to smite an particularly irritating insect. The human cracked her knuckles and settled into a combat stance that somehow managed to look both relaxed and absolutely lethal. The chains around her moved like living things, responding to intentions that hadn't yet become conscious thoughts. "Let's see what you've got," she said, and her smile promised that the Empire was about to learn several very expensive lessons about the dangers of making assumptions. The Guardian's opening salvo could have leveled a small city, and probably had during its field testing phase. Energy beams that existed in dimensions the human visual spectrum couldn't even perceive carved through the arena air, creating geometric patterns of destruction that would have been aesthetically pleasing if they weren't specifically designed to reduce organic matter to its component atom. The human wasn't there to receive them. She had moved before the weapons finished charging, chains whistling through trajectories that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics. What the Guardian's artificial intelligence couldn't process, what none of the Empire's carefully designed systems could comprehend, was that she had been studying its movement patterns since the moment it emerged. Every sensor sweep, every weapon calibration, every microscopic adjustment, had been cataloged and analyzed by a mind that treated combat like a particularly engaging mathematical equation. The first chain wrapped around the Guardian's primary sensor array with the precision of a surgeon's suture, while the second found the vulnerable joint where its left arm connected to its torso. The construct's massive frame provided excellent leverage for someone who understood how to redirect 30 feet of engineered destruction using nothing but physics and absolutely unreasonable amounts of audacity. The sound of the Guardian hitting the arena floor registered somewhere between an earthquake and a building collapse, with harmonics that suggested several expensive systems had just discovered new and interesting ways to malfunction. The crowd's shocked silence was broken only by the gentle patter of debris raining down from the arena's reinforced ceiling, which had not been designed to withstand the impact of its own ultimate weapon being used as an impromptu wrecking ball. Vex still stared at his displays, watching readouts that insisted the impossible had just occurred with the casual efficiency of a maintenance routine. The Guardian, 3 centuries of imperial engineering, billions of credits in development costs, and the combined destructive potential of 17 conquered civilizations, lay motionless in a crater of its own making, while a chained human stood over it like a sculptor admiring a particularly challenging piece. "Impossible," he whispered, though the word seemed inadequate to describe the systematic destruction of everything he understood about galactic hierarchy. The human looked up at the viewing boxes again, and this time her smile contained something that made Vexthul's primary heart skip several beats. It wasn't triumph or satisfaction, it was the expression of someone who had just realized that the entertainment was about to become significantly more interesting. "You know," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic systems, "I've been thinking about these chains." She held up her wrists, letting the quantum-locked restraints catch the arena's lighting in ways that highlighted their elegant construction and utterly impractical continued existence. The locks that had been designed to contain her until her inevitable death now seemed more like jewelry than imprisonment. "They're really quite beautiful, advanced materials, elegant engineering, probably cost more than most planets' annual defense budget." She examined the links with the appreciation of a connoisseur, "but they're also completely unnecessary at this point, wouldn't you agree?" With movements that suggested she had always known exactly how the locking mechanisms functioned, she pressed specific points on each restraint in sequence. The quantum locks disengaged with soft chimes that sounded almost apologetic, and the chains fell to the arena floor with musical notes that seemed to echo the death knell of imperial superiority. The crowd's reaction was beyond panic. It had transcended into something approaching philosophical crisis. They were witnessing the collapse of fundamental assumptions about the universe's natural order, and the Zephyrian mind was not equipped to process such revelations during what should have been a pleasant afternoon's entertainment. She was never actually restrained, Krendar realized, with the dawning horror of a scientist watching his life's work crumble. The chains were psychological theater. She could have removed them at any time. The implications rippled through the Colosseum like waves through still water. If the restraints had been voluntary, then everything they had witnessed wasn't desperate survival, it was a deliberate demonstration. A lesson taught through the medium of systematic destruction, delivered with the patience of someone educating particularly slow children. The human began walking toward the arena's exit, stepping over the remains of creatures that had never known defeat until today. Her movement was casual, unhurried, like someone finishing a pleasant workout and heading home for dinner. The massive doors that had sealed her fate now seemed laughably inadequate, obstacles designed for someone who actually wanted to be contained. "Where do you think you're going?" Vexthul's voice boomed across the arena, though it carried an undertone of desperation that suggested he already knew the answer. She paused and looked back with the patience of someone addressing a particularly dim student. "Home, obviously, though I suspect I'll have company soon enough." The statement wasn't a threat, it was a prediction based on the mathematical certainty that news of today's demonstration would spread across the galaxy faster than Imperial sensors could contain it. Every species the Empire had subjugated, every world they had conquered, every civilization they had deemed lesser, would soon learn that the natural order wasn't quite as fixed as their oppressors had claimed. "You can't leave," Vexthul protested, though his words carried the hollow ring of someone trying to convince himself as much as his audience. "The arena is sealed, the defenses are impregnable." His explanation was interrupted by the sound of reinforced quantum steel parting like paper as the human simply walked through the exit doors. The arena's legendary security systems, barriers that had contained the galaxy's most dangerous creatures for millennia, proved to be surprisingly optional when approached by someone who understood that locks only worked on those who agreed to be locked up. The silence that followed her departure was pregnant with implications that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. In the space of one afternoon, a single human had dismantled not just the Empire's collection of apex predators, but the foundational myths that justified their dominance over lesser species. Somewhere in the depths of space, primitive radio transmissions were already carrying news of the demonstration to worlds that had been waiting centuries for proof that their oppressors were not God. The signal would reach human space within days, where military strategists would analyze every detail of the performance and draw conclusions that would make Empire admirals wake up screaming for years to come. Vexthul slumped in his viewing chair, staring at arena displays that showed casualty statistics, which defied every model of interspecies combat ever developed. Around him, Imperial nobles sat in stunned silence, processing the uncomfortable realization that their entire civilization had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of where they stood in the galactic food chain.
The human's final words echoed through the Colosseum's perfect acoustics, a casual observation that would become the informal motto of the resistance movement spreading across 17 star systems. "You really should have done your research before assuming who the apex predators actually were." The arena doors sealed shut behind her, with finality that sounded remarkably like the closing of a coffin. Though whether it was being built for her or the Empire remained an open question that would be answered in the days to come.